Okay, so for our next presentation, we have something new and exciting. So we have two presenters, but one is going to be here, and then the other presenter is going to come from Zoom. Since we're all so used to Zoom now, I figure this would be, the way that everybody's used to. So anyway, here we have Garrett Ash. He's an associate research scientist at the Yale School of Medicine, Center for Medical Informatics, and Yale Children's Diabetes Program. He's also a U.S. Veterans Health Administration Associated Health Fellow, working on a digital health platform to integrate data from wearables into the VHA, System for Data-Driven Lifestyle Coaching. He's a member of the Sports Tech Research Network's Special Interest Group on Quality Assessment of Sports Technology. From Zoom, we're going to have Rajat Doshi. He's a junior at Yale University, majoring in computer science and economics. He's interested in the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare. He explores this interest through his research in the Gerstein Lab at Yale, his startup he founded called Peace of Mind, and his industry experience as a software engineering intern at Microsoft and the nonprofit Fight the Stroke. So without further ado, Garrett, and then we'll switch it out midway through.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary. Thanks, everyone. And how do I advance? Is there a clicker? Or
yeah, this clicker.
Okay. Okay. Great. So there have been some amazing, really exciting, cutting-edge talks today. The Clarkson group started us off at 8 o'clock this morning with machine learning from active video game devices to predict energy and fatigue, and then Norwell Health told us about decentralized clinical trials enrolling 1,500 participants using virtual methods. So I thought I would take a little step back in my presentation and start by talking about the first study I ever did after my dissertation, where I got really interested in promoting physical activity for type 1 diabetes, and I'll tell you why I got so interested in that. But the approach I took to it was not virtual. It was in person. And I'll show you my journey from that to the digital tools and how I started to pick those up to address the challenges that I encountered with the in-person group. And then when I introduce Rajat and turn it over to him, we'll talk about how we're just starting to get to that machine learning area and how that can help us address the challenges we've been encountering. So the N size of these studies are 20. It's really just getting at the sort of feasibility of these studies, the participant engagement and satisfaction, and starting to look at what can achieve our goals of increasing physical activity, improving physique. So just some quick definitions. I want to emphasize I'm focusing on type 1 diabetes in this talk, and that is distinct from type 2 diabetes. The risk factors for type 1 diabetes are genetic, viral, or unknown. It's hard to predict when someone will get type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is lifestyle and genetically related, but the risk factors are much clearer. In type 1 diabetes, the pancreatic beta cells get destroyed. In type 2 diabetes, there is improper use of insulin by the liver and muscles. So in type 1 diabetes, the body does not make insulin. In type 2 diabetes, the body actually makes more insulin in early stages and then decreases that in its advanced stages. But the result in either case, that blood glucose becomes chronically elevated. This becomes the health risk. Because the insulin becomes totally absent in type 1 diabetes, it presents with acute symptoms. The person starts to feel immediately nauseous and vomiting and dizzy, and there's a ER admission. Whereas type 2 diabetes, the symptoms develop gradually over time. Type 1 diabetes is always treated with insulin. Type 2 diabetes can be treated with medication or insulin. Lifestyle treatment for type 1 diabetes, diet and physical activity, can improve blood glucose control and mitigate comorbidities of the disease, but it will not reverse the disease. It's not lifestyle that brings on the disease either. In type 2 diabetes, weight loss, diet, and physical activity can mitigate or even reverse the disease. In both cases, hemoglobin A1C is metrics to keep in mind. But in type 1 diabetes, we keep this low for the sake of minimizing cardiovascular risk. In type 2 diabetes, it can mitigate risk to keep it low, but keep it very low can reverse disease. So type 2 diabetes, much more common, but type 1 diabetes, still very prevalent, still affecting quite a few people. So also because of the virtual interest here, I will say type 1 diabetes is, I think, the most exciting disease to study if you're interested in wearable technology. It's this constant process of monitoring biometrics of blood glucose and administered insulin levels. And even the person who is not into commercial wearable devices living with this disease will get very benefit from using these types of wearables. Exercise with type 1 diabetes is very difficult, very complicated, very confusing. This is still a lot of anecdotal evidence. Things work differently for different people. Because exercise can make blood glucose go too low or too high. The response varies based upon a lot of these factors shown here: the context, the type of exercise, what's been taken previously in terms of insulin and carbs, the person's physical fitness level. So these steps have to be taken in advance. Reduce insulin and or take a carbohydrate supplement, monitoring blood glucose, and again, following that trial and error approach to find exercise that keeps blood glucose in a good range. Watch for warning signs of blood glucose becoming too low, which happens because of that exogenous insulin that has to be administered. And if blood glucose is high, there's a need to check urine for that diabetic ketoacidosis I mentioned in the initial presentation. That can occur in the context of normal treatment, and that's needed before safely beginning exercise. And a lot of the literature that is available on exercise for type 1 diabetes focuses on the promotion of exercise and guidance of exercise for elite athletes or for serious athletes with type 1 diabetes. Most of the interventions for general health for type 1 diabetes target the chronic elevation of blood glucose, ways to self-manage diabetes better to improve health. But other modifiable disease risk factors are also present. You can have both type 1 diabetes as well as overweight or obesity, even though that etiology is normally thought to be part of type 2 diabetes. You can have hypertension, dyslipidemia, sedentary lifestyle. And again, there's a need for activity guidance for people who are suffering from these risk factors. So again, I'm going to start with describing the successes and challenges of an in-person group for exercise promoting for type 1 diabetes with human coaches. Then I'll move to a digital app with partial human coaching, and then end with methodology for an automated scalable digital solution. So again, that self-managed problem solving around exercise in type 1 diabetes becomes very confusing. How do I adjust my insulin? How do I eat? How do I check my, what should I be looking for to modulate my blood glucose? And I have to keep checking my blood glucose to make sure. The need for this indicates need to plan ahead to control all these factors. But for youth, physical activity is often spontaneous. Hey, let's go play volleyball. And you can't make that adjustment to the insulin and diet need if you just want to go play volleyball with your friends. Hypoglycemia is something that causes fear. The fear that you might start to feel low blood glucose. What happens if I start to feel dizzy? What if I appear drunk in public? What if I go low while I'm driving home from the gym? And social barriers. There's a lack of knowledge and understanding around type 1 diabetes, and children will feel called out if the teacher says, okay, before we start gym class, Jimmy has to check his blood glucose. There's a lot of lack of understanding among peers, like, hey, can you eat that? You have diabetes. Can you play sports? You have diabetes. And so a lot of these pressures are problematic. and just with the situation with COVID, with restriction to home environment and just general issues of built environment, lead to barriers to physical activity for all of us, including children with type 1 diabetes. So our study addressed a group physical activity program for youth with type 1 diabetes. We had diabetes self-management education to address that confusion about how to address blood glucose, stress management and relaxation techniques targeting fear of hypoglycemia. There was never a program that allowed youth with type 1 diabetes to exercise in a group, to have a comfortable space to practice exercise safety for diabetes, to meet other children with type 1 diabetes. And so testing blood sugar becomes, let's all tie our shoes, let's all test our blood sugar, and then let's go exercise. And in addition, they could have discussions about how to communicate, how to resolve conflicts, and discuss these strategies as a group. And we also involve the parents and caregivers in this program because of the need to support that environment that is conducive to physical activity and avoid a sedentary home lifestyle. So these are the specifics of the program. We met once a week for 12 weeks, exercising in a group with these different discussion components. A typical strategy, a schedule for addressing the needs of this group, we would test blood glucose at the beginning of the session. They would fill out a weekly blood glucose log so we could monitor physical activity over the, but monitor their blood glucose safety over the course of the whole week, and look for instances where exercise may be destabilizing or making difficult to manage blood glucose. The teens would exercise while the parents would have a group discussion. Then they would switch roles for the last part. Safety monitoring involves blood glucose check, correction with blood with a snack like Starburst or glucose gel, which is a strategy to bring blood glucose into a safe range. And then insulin adjustments were made if needed. They were assisted to call the provider on call for advice on taking insulin. And asked to be mindful of low blood glucose symptoms during the entire program. This just shows the kind of exercises that we would do as a group. They're mixed exercises because light exercise, moderate intensity exercise can cause blood glucose lowering, and heavily intense interval exercises causes blood glucose elevation. So by mixing up the two, there can be a stabilizing effect. So just showing some of the drills that we did. Non-competitive cooperative games was the thing the children said that they enjoyed doing, such as relay races or group tag games. This is what we discussed in the classes, focus on tips of exercising with diabetes as well as nutrition. And as I said, we had these sessions on coping skills and discussions and role playing about communication and conflict resolution. So if there's an annoying kid in my class who calls me out about having diabetes, makes me feel threatened or isolated, what is a strategy for handling that situation? The parents had the chance to express challenges related to diabetes management and receive education on related topics, and we had exercise for the parents as well to have that to promote that environment of physical activity in the home. So I'm going to show the results of the trial of our program. We wanted to evaluate feasibility and safety and estimate the pre-post effects on physical activity and other exploratory outcomes, nutritional, psychosocial, clinical, and fitness pertinent to the self-management of type 1 diabetes. This was a single group trial with follow-ups at 3 months and 7 months. So you can see our population was adolescents. We had a majority of girls in the program.
About half had adopted the diabetes technology of an insulin pump that automatically infuses insulin. This is slightly lower than national levels of adopting this advanced insulin delivery methodology. This may relate to the fact that we had, on average, a low-income population. Over half were in households less than 40K per year. This group is has slower uptake of diabetes technology. We also had predominantly minority race ethnicity, and that is also associated with lower uptake of diabetes technology, even after adjustment for socioeconomic factors. This A1C level of 9.5 indicates poor glycemic control. They were also had a BMI in the overweight to obese range. So this was a vulnerable group in need of intervention for physical activity and for diabetes management. Their cardiovascular risk factor profile was normal, although their physical fitness scores indicated by the PACER test were in the bottom 25% for their age and gender. And their lifestyle habits were poor at baseline, with physical activity about 1/3 of the recommendations, very little of that in 10-minute bouts, high amount of screen time, and low intake of fruits and vegetables. We used some actographs and food diaries to monitor these. So it was very rare that participants showed up for the program with blood glucose below safe levels for exercise. This is something that is seen a lot in type 1 diabetes. Serious athletes will often have to correct their blood glucose to make sure they don't go low during exercise. That was extremely rare in this group. Much more common was to have blood glucose in that elevated range at the start of exercise, and this requires a ketone test, urine ketones, to check for that diabetic ketoacidosis. That very rarely occurred. So by just making those precautionary checks, we were able to safely exercise, even though there were these high levels at the start. And this is the blood glucose levels before and after the exercise sessions, and 70 to 180 milligrams per deciliter is a safe clinical target range, and the lines show each participant on average throughout the intervention. So you can see a lot of participants, again, showing up with at high levels of blood glucose at baseline, but that leading to, by the end of the session, being more in a safe range. So the safety was very high. There was only one instance of someone having to sit out from a low episode of low blood sugar. So I'll just highlight from our feasibility metrics that the intervention completion rate of 56% was below what we were hoping to achieve with this group, although the completion of assessments was higher than other studies that have targeted these low-income populations with type 1 diabetes. The cost was relatively high for completing a session, and the major barrier was logistics of the in-person sessions. Some teams were traveling up to 30 miles to get to these sessions. To convene a group of a condition that affects about 1 in 500 children, there's about one of these children per school. So a lot of them had never met another child with type 1 diabetes before, and to convene just one central location required some of them to travel very far. So we could only hold sessions once per week on Saturdays. It got expensive to maintain the building during those times and find the staff per participant. But the teams said they really liked sharing personal experiences with their peers, and the non-competitive exercise games helped their sense of collaboration. So I'll just let you read that quote for a second, but it really sums up the benefits of convening the group, even though it was logistically challenging. We did see some results, positive change. Systolic blood pressure lowered over the course of the study. LDL cholesterol increased but stayed within normal ranges, and those low fitness scores from baseline improved to from 3 to about 4 minutes on the pacer run. So this was an improvement, although no other variables changed. So the exercises and discussions were both appealing for the children, and it was very safe with low instances of hyperglycemia and improved some metabolic variables. Arrival with high blood glucose was a challenge, although with ketone testing and monitoring, there were no safety concerns, no improvements to chronic physical activity, glycemic control, or body weight. And this was largely about the logistics of convening the group and staffing and maintaining consistent exercise with this approach. So this motivated me to get into digital apps, as we talked in the panel just before lunch about how in-person and apps and digital approaches have different things that you get from each one. And so while neither one should replace the other, I felt it was warranted to pursue digital approaches to supplement human coaching to move forward my research. So we want to create home-based exercise routines, motivational enhancement of exercise by a coach with specialized expertise, and this could help address feelings of alienation and isolation, not having good understanding of type 1 diabetes by coaches and peers, and then health feedback from a continuous glucose monitor is a major strategy to address these confusions and fears around diabetes management. We added other biosensors into this also, which I'll talk about. So continuous glucose monitoring has transformed the diabetes self-management landscape. So by testing, it's a sensor embedded in the abdomen, just a wire just under the skin, and it tests blood glucose every 5 minutes. So this creates these nice trends, and you can see not only what your blood glucose is, but whether it's increasing or decreasing over time. And then those trends can be linked to events like the vials show when insulin is taken, the knife and fork shows when eating occurs. And this leads to the generation of summary statistics, such as average value, variability, time spent in the high, normal, and low range, which is also indicated by the bars shown here. So it gives a much more global picture of diabetes management. And patients have reported this increases confidence and motivation to manage diabetes and adopt healthy lifestyle behaviors, but there's minimal research applying these to the promotion of exercise for individuals who are sedentary. So the approach that we took with the incorporation of the continuous glucose sensor is the information, motivation, behavioral skills model, which states that it's important to provide information, medical information, as well as motivation, standard encouragement. But it's important to realize this leads to behavioral skills, improving exercise management as you integrate this information and motivation, leading to better adherence and tracking the health outcomes from these new behaviors. And those health outcomes need to be fed back into the information and motivation that is given, so you can start to personalize the information that is given, and this further enhances the behavioral skills. This next study evaluates feasibility, satisfaction, and safety of a digital exercise app. And I focused on adults with type 1 diabetes in this study as a proof of concept. It's very common in diabetes research to start with adults and then move to children with type 1 diabetes enroll in a lot of clinical trials, but there's safety issues that should be worked out in the adult population first. So in this study, we provided on-demand exercise support with exercise videos, text message consultations, and guidance on the choice of exercise videos to stabilize blood glucose. Participants completed a daily mobile diary, which helps us get those events that we align with the blood glucose monitor that I mentioned. And they wore the continuous glucose monitor as well as the Apple Watch. Over the 10-week study, there were 2 time points at 4 and 8 weeks where they had a monthly consultation with a human coach providing personalized feedback, from the sensors and the diaries and the usage logs of the videos. The videos we used come from an app called Glucose Zone, which has about 700 choices in their library here, and they can be filtered by difficulty level, duration, the muscle groups used, whether it's mobility considerations like chair-based, knee-friendly, ones that use no equipment. They've been used in corporate wellness settings also, and based on the panel this morning, I know that's of interest to some of you, but in my case, they were a supplier of exercise videos for my type 1 diabetes intervention. There was text message support available, and this program called the Quick Start, where a video can be selected by entering starting blood glucose. And like I said, those considerations like continuous exercise lowers blood glucose, high intensity short bursts elevate blood glucose. So depending on a starting level, a particular workout can be chosen. On the mobile diaries, they were asked if they exercised the day before, and if not, please rank order top barriers to exercise. So these standard lists from the profile of mood states, positive feelings, energy, fatigue were queried. Then other common things that we heard people report: I didn't have time to do it, I had challenges managing my diabetes, fear of hypoglycemia, or I plan to take that day off from exercise. We also logged, they rated their sleep quality from the prior night, and they rated how fearful they were of hypoglycemia the night before and how fearful they were of hypoglycemia that morning going into the day, and worry of going low at some point. And then these personalized feedback sessions, we would hold on a monthly basis. We would plot out the blood glucose values over the 24-hour period, as I've shown here, going from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. And then we would overlay into this information about the exercise that they completed based on the usage logs from the videos. So a lot of the issues that people with diabetes have with commercial fitness trackers is the information is not specific enough to address those challenges with glucose regulation around diabetes that I mentioned. Just knowing how many steps were taken doesn't necessarily give all the information to know, is this exercise going to make my blood glucose go up or down? How should I adjust my insulin around this particular exercise? But by having this additional information from the exercise videos, we were able to give them more targeted information. So they could see patterns such as blood glucose dropping following exercise, blood glucose elevation around the time of exercise. We'd also show their non-exercise days averaged together. They could see from the metrics from the continuous glucose monitor things such as comparing the time spent in that clinical target range for blood glucose without the unhealthy elevations or reductions, the percent time above that range, and the average values. All of this can lead to motivation. Seeing the improvements from exercise, seeing blood glucose better on exercise than non-exercise days can be incentive to continue the exercise. And we would compare other variables from the diaries as well, and those may show improvement between exercise and non-exercise days. So this was not the disadvantaged sample that we got in the in-person study. We recruited a lot on social media. The study ran over the course of 2020. We stopped recruiting in clinics when the pandemic hit, and we're working on ways to increase our the diversity of participants we can enroll through the social media approach. We didn't figure it out in this study, unfortunately. The group had very strong adherence to all of the procedures that I just noted. So we got very complete data sets that we could give them feedback on, and that helped the data-driven insights that we'll ultimately develop. It was very safe from an episodic hypoglycemia standpoint, and overall, 2/3 said it was satisfying or very satisfying, and 83% said they would recommend it to a friend. So we were pleased with those basic feasibility and satisfaction results. Just briefly, it was effective at increasing movement, like we all want to do. They increased their exercise duration from a median of 4 to 64 minutes per week over the course of the 10 weeks. And body mass index did increase slightly over the course of the intervention. Weight management with type 1 diabetes is very complicated because of the supplemental carbohydrates being taken can offset the caloric expenditure, and this can be problematic for getting an energy deficit that is wanted to lose weight. So we didn't see improvements in body mass or waist circumference, although there were trends toward improvements in blood pressure, hemoglobin, HbA1c, and mean blood glucose values, all indicating better health, lower cardiovascular risk. And then when people were asked what they liked about the program, you can see here these discussions of exercise overlaid with these various variables like blood glucose, sleep, and mood were some of the highest rated components, proportion reporting above average satisfaction and the mean satisfaction scores reported. They were right up there with continuous glucose monitors, which are, as I said, have been a transformative device in the diabetes landscape. So this was very positive for us in terms of seeing that information, motivation, behavioral skills model, and this idea of feedback from the biosensors was exceptionally well received and has promise for future interventions. Discussions about these variables in isolation, like mood and sleep, exercise barriers, were rated low. So it was that overlay that was appealing. And people said they learned exercise management behavioral skills from the program, but they were seeking more consistent motivation, and digital tools could help with this. So they're very positive about the confidence this gave them. Like they knew they could exercise safely at home, guided by the videos. They were looking for a background motivation from the program. And they said the contact with the diaries improved that to some extent. Getting the diary every morning that they were supposed to complete gave them a sense of, I need to exercise because I don't want to be asked why I didn't exercise the next day. It helped them stay engaged with the study to report their sleep, their fear of hypoglycemia every day. But overall, they said there was not enough consistent motivation to reach the goal recommendations of 150 minutes per week that we targeted. So we became very motivated to look for additional digital solutions for more frequent touch points than the once per month human-based consultations that I showed earlier. So both in-person and digital protocols, although achieving slightly different things, the in-person achieving the peer group support component and that feeling of working together with other people with type 1 diabetes, whereas the digital approach achieving fewer logistical concerns and an increase in exercise. So good for different reasons, but all safe, feasible, and acceptable. And the heavy interest in the biosensor data drove the satisfaction, but we need more intensive interventions. So putting these together, we decided we should analyze biosensor data for more automated and scalable support. So now I'll move to the last part where Rajat is going to come in and talk about the methodology for an automated, scalable digital solution. And this is my last slide before I'll introduce Rajat. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of a just-in-time adaptive intervention. Text message encouragement can be helpful but overwhelming. Does anyone else's phone look like this right now in the audience? So when you get too many notifications, people start to ignore them. But if a notification is given at just the right time, it can be effective. So if you give the notification to the smoker, reminding them not to smoke at exactly the time that they were going to spoil their quit attempt, that can be an effective intervention. So the question we asked is, when are people with type 1 diabetes vulnerable to missing their exercise? So I will now turn over to Rajat to talk about the mathematics of figuring this out.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me right now? Okay, sweet. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm worried that I didn't get the chance to talk today. I unfortunately have COVID right now, but thanks to this virtual world and I'm pretty excited to present the research that Garrett and I have been working on. So we set out to essentially create a machine learning tool to predict exercise behaviors in people with type 1 diabetes using two types of their biometric data and their diary data. So first, really great overview of the study, and we'll both biometric data, and we wanted to see this data in order to build an intelligent tool. Okay, so what is our overall overview? Whenever I think of machine learning, I like to isolate it into subcomponents. If you think of it as what's the X that you feed into a model, what's the Y that comes just on a very high level, in the biometric and data into this black box will ultimately produce a Y. Did they exercise on a specific day or did they not? Or a one. The point of this presentation is color in the more context, different models we try, maybe talk about specific um, things that we consider. I'm getting an echo. Do you have this off? Okay, could the audio a little bit choppy? I just saw in chat that it's getting an echo. Okay. Is the audio any bit better? I think so. Okay. I'm gonna keep going. Let me know if the audio is still choppy. Okay, so I'm gonna continue talking about the data that we had to play with. So there's a sequential nature to our data. Specifically, the sequential nature of this data is the fact that we had past empirical data and we were trying to predict future behaviors. So what exactly does that mean? Safe, we're 5 days in. We conducted this trial for a longer extended period of time, but safe, we're trying to predict exercise on day 5. We can look at different factors and features for the past days. So say, for instance, they had a fear of hyperglycemia on day 1 and they reported that. They had poor sleep and they reported that in the diary. We looked at their biometric data and we noticed nocturnal hypoglycemia on day 3, and on day 4, they were sick. Likely we can conclude on day 5, they might be at a point of vulnerability and maybe they won't exercise that day. So there's a sequential nature in the data that is really, really good in terms of predicting the future. So when we're designing a machine learning model, we want to incorporate this element of time in the past into it. Specifically talking about like the features in the model, we could subdivide into 3 different classes. One would be biometric data. So this includes the glucose data, as well as data that we can get from an Apple Watch, such as one's heart rate or their breathing. We also have diary data, which incorporates their sleep, their fear of hypoglycemia in the morning and in the evening, as well as if they're sick or not. And then finally, we have some multimodal data of exercise hazards. So for instance, let's consider an instance in which someone takes an insulin bolus within 2 hours of an exercise instance. And there's a relationship that exists between taking insulin before your exercise and exercising, in which there's like this compounding effect. However, if you think there's like an additive effect and you don't manage your exercise properly, there's that puts you at risk for a hypoglycemic episode, which in turn can result in like a negative experience for your exercise, which in the future might discourage exercise. So what we did is we looked at different modal factors, such as like one's glucose, one's insulin, one's exercise instances, and made intelligent and smart features and incorporate these different elements. That's just one instance, and we did that for 4 different times for 4 different features and incorporate that into the inputs into these models that we're creating. So what models did we create? There's 2 big ones that we created, but The first one I'm going to talk about is random forest. So I'm first going to give a little bit of context to what random forest is. Okay, so on a very high level, random forest is composed of multiple decision trees. So what is a decision tree? A decision tree is basically a way to explain a result in terms of like this traversal through a tree. So at every leaf in a tree, you could either go left or right on the tree, depending on a condition. So say, for instance, a condition could be glucose levels for a person's specific day was less than 100. And if it's true, it goes one way down the tree and the other way. And if it's false, it goes the other way down the tree. The next level of the tree could be looking at their sleep. And it could say if their sleep that they reported is greater than 4, go this direction to the left. And if it's higher than 4, go to the right direction. Essentially, what this does is allows us to understand how a machine learning model is predicting a class. Because at the end, what we get is we either get like a red or a green. So we predict a red or a green, one or the other classes. This is really good because now we can run this multiple times, which in analogy is similar to chemistry, right? In chemistry, you run multiple experiments, and as you run multiple experiments, on average, you'll get a better result. It's the same exact idea and principle at random forest. And what we're doing is we're running multiple decision trees to get very accurate predictions, because each decision tree will ultimately yield a prediction, and on average, as we run it more times, we get more accurate results. So that's what random forest is. On a high level, let's talk a little bit about our specific implementation of random forest. So there's 16 features in our model, 16 input features that will go in. Remember that on a high level, machine learning is X's, models, and Y's. So the X's are the 16 features. What we did is we split our data into an 80-20 split. That means 80% of our data goes into the training set and 20% of our data goes into the testing set. So we took 80% of our data and we're going to train our models off of this, and then we're going to spend 20% of our data to validate these models. The number of decision trees that we have in our model is 20. So we're running that trial 20 different times to see if you can get better and better results. And the max depth that this tree can go is 10. So there's like 10 levels on this tree that we can go down to make a prediction ultimately and get to that bottom node in which it's going to be like one class or another. Ultimately, this is like a 2-class problem, right? We're going to say on a specific day there's exercise or there's no exercise. So it's a binary classification problem where we're trying to figure out on a specific day whether there's exercise or not. So what did we learn? Well, we achieved about a 73% accuracy in predicting whether or not there's exercise on a given day. But I think that the key and the result, and that's more important for random forest, is interpretability of the model, right? Like us understanding how specific features influence what we're ultimately predicting at the end. We're able to understand that each feature has an influence on the output, but now we have like a relative weighting and importance. In this diagram, we could see like each and every single feature, along with how important it was in terms of predicting the output variable. Like just on a high level, we can see a lot of the glucose statistics are particularly useful in predicting whether or not someone's going to exercise. For instance, a mean nighttime. Say if they run low in their glucose levels and have a hypoglycemic episode, or if they run higher, like a hyperglycemic episode, maybe those are really good predictors for the next day and whether or not one person's going to exercise. Interpretability is a very important thing in machine learning, because oftentimes we build these black boxes and aren't able to understand what each feature really means in terms of the model. If we have like clarity about what exactly each feature means, then maybe we could build more intelligent solutions to intervening in moments in which there's vulnerabilities. Okay, so we also used a neural network to see if we can build a model that we can use in an app one day. So a neural network, once again, can be kind of subdivided into these 3 different components: the X's, the model, and the Y's. So the X's is this matrix that encodes the features of the model, which is just like a mathematical representation for all the data in our data set. And then a neural network is just composed of this input layer, some hidden layers, and an output layer. An output layer is, a binary value that indicates whether on a specific day one's going to exercise or not. And the hidden layers are essentially, to basically learn these interrelationships that could exist between the features. This is kind of the mystery behind the neural networks, because the neural network is picking up on patterns that that we can't even pick up on just by looking at the data and looking at numbers. So how exactly did our neural network look? So there was 16 features in our input layer in that matrix. There were 4 different hidden layers, so those middle layers that would pick up patterns. And the number of weights in our model was 3,814 weights. So that's the number of parameters that our model is learning. And because we had a binary problem in which we wanted to predict 0 or 1, the loss function that we used was a sparse categorical cross-entropy loss function, which basically just says, what are we predicting? What's the correct output? And what's the difference between that? What did we end up getting? Well, we ended up getting a neural network that was very good. It had a high sensitivity towards predicting and understanding days in which there was no exercise, and was able to, on about 80% of the time, predict those days in which there's no exercise. We also see that there's a low specificity of about 55%, which, which means that on day they're predicting false positives, right? Like days in which there is exercise, they're predicting no exercise. Granted, our data set was definitely something that we're want to expand in the future to help improve our sensitivity and specificity. But right now, what we can see is we could pretty reasonably predict days in which there's no exercise, which could be particularly useful in, signaling to a user and being like, hey, maybe there's some indicators that today you might be at opponent vulnerability, and maybe have an encouraging message towards exercise. At the same time, we do want to bring up our specificity numbers in the future, because over messaging is also could be potentially harmful, because it could dilute the message and the impact of these indicators and these messaging services. So in conclusion, we tried out we tried out various different models, but ultimately presenting 2 different models and 2 different machine learning tools that could ultimately predict exercise, which and is in line with our hypothesis. Can we build these intelligence solutions to predict exercise given biometric and diary data? You see that these models were sensitive to miss exercise days, but not specific enough. Our ultimate goal is that we want to integrate these models into an app so that we can encourage users at a vulnerable point in time to exercise. So in the future, that we see ourselves expanding this to larger trials, but using a lot of the same infrastructure that we've built in the past. So what we see is our research is a really promising step to show that we can intelligently learn different patterns in people's biometric data, along with the data that they report in diaries, in order to predict exercise behaviors. So in the future, we're going to integrate this into applications, specifically with a lot of people that we use to conduct these clinical trials, so that we can refine these models and iterate and maybe come up with some sort of smarter and better intelligence to help encourage exercise. But yeah, that's just a little bit of a higher level overview of the machine learning work that we did, and we're pretty excited about where we are and what we have coming in the future. Thank you so much for your time, and happy to take any questions along with Garrett.